Hello and welcome to another live stream on Sunday afternoon at 2 p.m. So welcome to yet another GCSE revision class, live GCSE revision class. So welcome to everybody watching on YouTube. Thank you very much for joining me. Please like, comment and subscribe so I can continue doing more videos like this. But also maybe check out the link to my Patreon in the description where you'll be able to see this full video. So for those of you on YouTube, we will be doing some introductory activities and I'll be talking about figurative language in a theoretical way so that you understand what it is, how to use it. And then I'm going to pause about halfway through this lesson to end the YouTube video, and the full video will be available for my members on Patreon. So if you want to become a member, it's just £7 a month. I do one of these live lessons every week. There is a worksheet attached every single week, a worksheet that I've created. Hopefully I try and make it a little bit fun as well, so that, make it worth your while. So also, if you do join Patreon and you can't join at 2 p.m. on a Sunday, you can watch the full thing whenever you want because all the recordings are up there as well. Okay, so let's get into today's lesson. We're going to be looking at figurative language today. So we're going to be continuing our work on creative writing that we started 2 weeks ago. So last week we did a maths lesson. We're back to English now. And we made a start on creative writing last time we did English. So last time we did creative writing, we had a little look at structure and how we structure stories and descriptions. So about planning the piece of writing and working out the building blocks of putting it together, and making the pacing work, making it flow, making it feel well constructed. So today what we're going to do is look more at language and how we actually articulate ourselves within a piece of creative writing. So you'll notice that the title of the video is how to write figuratively, so how to use figurative language. So some of you may not have heard of that phrase before. It essentially means write creatively, but we use the word figurative because figurative essentially means metaphorical. It means not literal. Okay, so figurative language is any language that isn't literal language. And by literal language, I mean saying things as they are. So I might say that that's wrong side, this is a guitar. Okay, that's literal because it literally is. Okay, but if I'm speaking figuratively, I might say that this is a beautiful music machine. Okay, so what I've done there is I'm not telling a lie. There's still truth in it, but it's not literal truth. It's not something you can physically see, hear or touch necessarily. And what I've actually got in there, music machine, I've got a bit of alliteration, but we'll come to that in a minute. So if you've got your notebooks ready, just going to head over now to a document so we can just write a note initially about what figurative language is. So figurative language is language used in all forms of creative writing to express I'm supposed to express anything, to express something that is not literal. Okay, so that's the most literal definition of it. So anything that isn't literal, it's not just simply what it is. There's an extra bit of poetry attached, an extra bit of fancy language perhaps that adds a bit of beauty to it. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a second now just to copy that down in your notebooks. I always think it's good to keep notes as you go. We're actually going to be writing quite a few notes today because we're going to be writing some examples for lots of different pieces of figurative language as we go. So I'm just going to give you 30 seconds now to get that written down. If you're watching a recording, you can perhaps pause it if it's going to take you a little bit longer, but we'll get on to the next bit in just a second. Okay, so in terms of how you might be more familiar with the concept of figurative language, if you've not heard of that term before, it's pretty much the language techniques that you're often introduced to as early as primary school. So things like similes and metaphors. So language techniques are kind of the nuts and bolts, if you will, of how we put together figurative language. We can speak figuratively without necessarily a specific technique, as long as we're using really interesting vocabulary, but normally we're being figurative through the use of a technique. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is, just on your own initially, I'm just going to, my pen's being a bit slow today, my computer's being a bit slow in fact, so if my handwriting's extra bad with this pen, I can blame it on that. So figurative language techniques, we're going to put that in a bubble with enough space on your page so that you can do a little mind map. And what I would like you to do is just see if you can think of as many different techniques as you already know. You don't necessarily need to know what they mean or how to use them, but just techniques that you've heard of. So put a simile there to start you off. That's normally the one people start with. Sorry if that's the only one you can remember. You might be annoyed that I've already written that down, but I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes just to write down as many as you can think of. Again, if you're watching a recording, you might want to just fast forward now, because I'm going to pause for a moment while people get that down, and then we'll come back and brainstorm our ideas together. Okay, right. So let's have a little brainstorm then. So we also have metaphor. Now I'm going to rush through these a little bit as I list them, but don't panic, because I am coming back to each one and I'm going to write a definition for each one, and also an example, so how we might put it into a piece of writing. So we have personification. We have onomatopoeia. All vowels in that word. We have sibilance. We have alliteration. What else do we have? We have hyperbole. Ooh. Help if I could spell it, wouldn't it? Hyperbole. Funny word, that one again. We have some strange ones. We could have zoomorphism, which is very similar to personification. I'll specify the difference in a moment. We have oxymorons. Pathetic fallacy. Do we have? That's probably enough to be going on with. There might be some really glaringly obvious ones that I'm forgetting. We have semantic field. I'd argue that's closer to a structured technique, really, but it's to do with the language, so there's a crossover there. And we'll leave it there. That's quite enough to be going on with. Okay, so all of these are techniques we can use, or the names of certain types of figurative language. Okay, so we're going to look at the definition for each of these. As we go, I will just cross them off with a highlighter, I think. So let's start with, over here, let's start with hyperbole. So as we go, we're going to write these notes in our notebook. So hyperbole is just the word we use in English and writing to mean exaggeration. So exaggeration going... Oh, I've not spelled that right. It's one R. My finger must have slipped. Come on. My computer's also being really slow today. There we go. Hang on. What am I not seeing here? What's double G? There we go. See, we all get stuff wrong. It's important to get stuff wrong. Exaggeration, going over the top. Okay, so an example of hyperbole then might be something like car flew down the highway. Flew down the highway. I'm going to do semicolon. It was a rocket launching into space at light speed. Now, inevitably, what I've actually done there, whilst I've exaggerated, because of course the car's not going that fast, I've also incorporated another technique. So for those of you who might be able to spot that, you'll know that I've also used a metaphor, because I'm stating that the car is a rocket. It is something it can't literally be. I will go further into metaphors in a moment. But sometimes there tends to be crossover with a lot of these, just because of the nature of what you're saying. So there is often metaphor within hyperbole. Okay, we can cross hyperbole off. Just cross it off with a highlighter. Okay, so the next one is simile. So make sure you're copying these down as you go. If you'd rather write your own examples, then absolutely do that. You don't need to copy down mine. So a simile is comparing one thing to another using, well, not necessarily, but most often using the words like or as to structure the comparison. So an example of that might be the stars sparkled. Doing that, sparkled like freshly cut diamonds in the moonlight. So by using that word like there, I'm not saying it is. They're not saying they are freshly cut diamonds in the moonlight. I'm saying they're like freshly cut diamonds. It's a slightly different turn of phrase. Different to this up here where I'm saying the car was a rocket. So I'm saying it is that thing. So this being a metaphor, this being a simile, they're quite similar. Similes and metaphors. It's just the structure of the sentence is slightly different. Okay. Lovely. I'll give you a second to write that down as well. I will cross off simile. Okay, so the next one is something called pathetic fallacy. Now, this is something you might most often see at the beginning of a text when we're setting the scene. And the reason for that is because pathetic fallacy is the process of describing the weather within a piece of creative writing in order to create a mood or atmosphere. So it doesn't necessarily have to be at the beginning. If you want to shift mood or tone and use weather to do that, and you absolutely can. So, you know, simple examples might be if it's a sunny day, it's probably going to be a more happy, joyful feeling or tone to the story. If it's or description. If it's rainy and thundery, then it's probably going to be a bit more depressing or mysterious and dark. Okay. So pathetic fallacy, using the weather to create atmosphere or tone in a story description. Okay. So an example of that would be the howling wind whispered threateningly through the gaps in the rattling window. Okay, so I'm using the weather there to create like a mysterious, threatening, spooky mood. What I've also done is another language technique. So as I say, there's lots of crossover here with lots of different techniques. So some of you may have spotted it, but I've also, because I've specified the wind is whispering, I'm saying the wind is doing something that a human would do, which is personification, which we will write down in a moment. So if we can get this one written down as well, the pathetic fallacy. We'll move on in just a second. Okay, lovely. Right, then we have personification, which is what I was just talking about, which is good timing. So personification is where you are describing an object, an inanimate object, not something that is alive, as if it were alive, and more specifically, as if it were a human. So this is often done through actions or feelings. So you might state that something is lonely, if there's nothing else around it, which would be a feeling, or you might state that something is whispering, like the wind, which is an action. So that's how you make it sound like a human. Some actions are more animal-like, and that's where we come into zoomorphism, which we will briefly cover in a moment. So the definition of personification, describing non-human inanimate objects, or non-human objects, because sometimes you could describe an animal as if it were a human. So describing non-human objects as if they were human, either through feelings or actions. So another example of this might be ticking furiously. The clock waved its hands to grab Sophie's attention. There's a sense there that time itself is impatient because the clock is impatient. It's furious and it's waving its hands. So that's something a human being would do and something a human being would feel. So that's why it's personification. Okay, I'm just going to give you a moment to copy that down. Okay, so the next one is semantic field. Okay, so semantic field, as I said before, is a little bit more, perhaps a little bit more structural. It's more about the number of words you have around a certain topic. So a semantic field is when you have several words within a short piece of text that all share similar meanings, associations, or connotations. My spelling's not very good today, is it? Connotations, of course. Okay, so what that means is that you will be describing something and then you use quite a few words that you might put into a group. So I might use a load of words that are to do with cars. So I might I might not even be talking about cars, but I'm making some kind of comparison to cars in using words about cars. So let me think of an example of that. I set myself up here for a difficult task. So, I trudged up the hill, wheezing. Wheezing and growling. Now, growling's more like a sound of an engine, I suppose. Wheezing and growling. My tread worn thin, and my my steering out of alignment. Now that sounds like I'm struggling up a hill and I'm kind of like weaving my way around. But the words in there that are associated with cars would be growling, tread, steering, alignment, wheel alignment, that is. So I guess I'm inadvertently trying to compare myself to like an old car. Sometimes these semantic fields are a bit more abstract, so it might be about like love. So let's say that the friends parted company with full hearts and generous smiles, ready to meet one another again. Something else to do with love. With warm embraces. Okay, so we get an overall feeling from that sentence because of the semantic field, because there are so many words associated with love. So you could argue friends is love. The phrase full heart, generous, maybe smiles as well, warm embraces. So all of those words make us think of this idea of love, and so therefore it creates that tone of love. Up here, when it's not necessarily something abstract, it's more that it creates that association in your mind for that thing. Okay, that's quite a tricky one. So semantic field is done. Metaphor. Now, a lot of these that we've already gone over are kind of metaphor can be more of an umbrella term. A lot of these are also metaphor. So hyperbole often slips into metaphor. Personification is definitely a form of metaphor. Semantic field in some ways, because you're not saying something is like something, you're kind of insinuating it is that thing, potentially. Sometimes it can slip into metaphorical language. So, yeah, metaphor comes up quite a lot. So, a metaphor is similar to simile in that it's making a comparison between two things by stating that one thing is the other when it literally can't be. So as I said at the beginning, this is not literal language we're talking about. It cannot be true. So I cannot say that a cat is a fire, but I can, if I said that the Ginger Tom was a blazing, fire-spitting sparks, we know it isn't, but we know what that means. That probably means that the Ginger Tom is quite angry and it's perhaps spitting in the way that cats do. But it gives us an exaggerated idea of how angry that cat is. So again, it's almost a way of creating hyperbole and metaphor kind of sit in a similar place, really. Okay. That was a really nice one I just made up. I'm going to have to make a new one now. Let's do a clouds. So, clouds. Broke apart. Spilling cotton. Around the sky. That one's not quite as good. I'm saying it's spilling cotton. I'm saying that because it looks like cotton. I'm looking at a cloud right now. It looks like cotton. We know it's not. I could say like it was spilling cotton around the sky when they break apart and there's little bits, the wisps of everywhere. But I didn't. I chose to do a metaphor, which means I'm saying it is that thing. We know it literally isn't, but we can really visualize it when it's stated as fact. So it's using figurative language, but speaking of it in a literal way. Okay, well, I'll let you just write that one down. Metaphor's done. Onomatopoeia. So, onomatopoeia, pay attention to the spelling of this word. I'll get this one right. Had lots of practice with this one. So many vowels in it. So it's the use of words that sound like the thing they are describing. And do note that with onomatopoeia, you don't actually have to use words that are real words. You can just make words up that sound like the sound. That's the beauty of language and creative writing, is that you can kind of do what you want with it. So words and phrases that sound like the thing they are describing. Okay, and then so an example of that might be that clanging and pinging down the flagstone corridor. The cook's pans sang a tinny ditty. And the pinging there that are onomatopoeic because clang has a certain sound, and ping, clang, they kind of sound like the thing that they're doing, the pans falling on the floor going down the corridor. I need an apostrophe there because the pans belong to her. Okay, so onomatopoeia is done. We now have sibilance. Okay. So sibilance is a repetition of S sounds. So people often associate it with alliteration. They say, well, it's just alliteration with S's. It's not necessarily true. Alliteration, which again we'll go over in a moment, is the repetition of sounds at the beginning of words that are either next to each other or close together. Sibilance doesn't have to be at the beginning of words. Prime example of this is she sells seashells on the seashore. Now, not all of the S sounds in that phrase are at the beginning of the words. So she sells seashells. So those are at the end of the words. So it can be in the middle or the end. Doesn't really matter. And the most common reasons for using sibilance is either to create like an onomatopoeic sound, like the sea or like the wind. So you want it to sound like the scene you might be describing. It's often used when describing water. Or we tend to have an association with it as something dark and sinister because of perhaps our cultural associations with the serpent and evil, and all going back to the biblical story with Adam and Eve. Alternatively, some people think that that's just hardwired into us, that snakes are threatening evolutionarily, therefore we find S sounds threatening. But I think it's probably more of a cultural thing. So sibilance, by definition, is the repetition of S sounds to either create a soundscape or to suggest something dark and sinister. So I could do two examples there, one for the soundscape and one for the dark and sinister. So slowly the sliding door slams shut as Sam is submerged into darkness. Now you can see here the S sounds aren't always at the beginning of, and also sh sounds are all part of this sibilance, the sh kind of sounds. I've got S at the end of slams and S at the end of darkness as well. So slowly the sliding doors slam shut as Sam is submerged into darkness. Okay. In terms of the C then, shoals of swimming fish skip across stones in the shimmering sea. So there I've created that seascape sound of the water. Shoals of swimming fish skip across stones in the shimmering sea. And we can kind of hear the sh of the water. Okay. I don't know how much my mic picks that up, by the way, so that might be interesting to listen back to. Sibilance is done. Right, just a few more. Alliteration. So as I say, if you can as well, just be copying these down as we go. I will pause after I've done all of these and just kind of pause on the last few for you to just copy down before I then move on. So alliteration, the repetition of sounds at the beginning of words. Now, some people like to think of alliteration as the repetition of letters at the beginning of words. So like the buzzy bee buzzed, it's all the repetition of B, right? But the key is that it's the repetition of the B, okay? So the phonic sound of the letter. So therefore, you can have alliteration where it's not the same letter necessarily, as long as it creates the same sound. So like the fox phoned furiously. So that that f sound is creating the alliteration. It doesn't matter that one of those words is PH. So that's a crucial thing too. Language is there to be heard. That's the key thing. Okay. So an example of this might be glittering glowworms gloat about greenery. That doesn't make any sense really, but it is alliteration. So glittering glowworms gloat about greenery. G, 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 g. What it's often there for is to create a rhythm. Either it's going to slow it down if it's longer, elongated sounds like m, n, r, s, like that s might slip into sibilance. But if it's more plosive sounds, it's going to speed it up, and you might think about why the writer's done that. So like this guttural kind of plosive g, or like b, t, d, k, they're all going to speed it up. Okay. Be second to write that down. Ooh. What's going on here? Ah! Had an absolute moment there. Are we back? No, we're not. That's fine. Slight technical issue here. Okay. Right, let me just sort that out then. I don't know. Okay, we're just going to skip to this, and I'm going to add a document. Apologies if you're watching this live. My computer has got a mind of its own today. There we go. Okay. So let's put that there. Fine. Okay, we're back. Right. Okay. So we've done alliteration. We're now going to move on to oxymorons. This isn't that common within like prose texts. It's more common in like Shakespeare plays and poetry, but it does happen. So an oxymoron is where you have two words next to one another, and they fundamentally have different connotations and different meanings, or opposites actually, rather than different. They're opposites. So I might have loving hate, which is a classic one from Juliet. I might have open lock. Okay, so the lock meaning something's closed, open is open. So two words next to each other that have opposite meanings / connotations. So we'll do a couple of examples for this. So I might have hateful hug. Yeah, you wouldn't expect a hateful hug. Or I might have in fact, even the phrase broken promise itself is kind of an oxymoron. Or I might have a loyal traitor. So it's often like an adjective and then a noun in terms of its structure. Where the adjective is describing something that would normally be associated with the opposite, the antonym of that noun. Okay. But it's often to create conflict as well and confusion in the text, purposeful confusion, where there is perhaps confusion amongst the characters and maybe conflict. Yeah. Okay, so oxymoron is done. Last one is zoomorphism, which is one that links kind of to personification. It's very similar in that it is, rather than making an object sound like a person, you're making it sound like an animal for a particular effect. You might want them to sound threatening, or you might want them to sound, or the thing to sound timid, depending on the animal that you compare it to. Because animals are great sources of comparison because, you know, they all have their own little characters, don't they? You might have a sly fox or a ferocious tiger, or you might have an anxious meerkat, a graceful bird. So you're making comparisons to animals. We've kind of already got an idea of what that thing is like. So describing an object as if it were an animal through actions, I'd say. We don't tend to talk about feelings with animals as much. So through the actions that they do, are they animal-like? What could I say? I could say that Tom dropped the coin, which scurried frantically into town, the nearest drain. So the scurried frantically is not something we would do as humans necessarily, but it's an animal-like thing, and I'm imagining it now like a rat or a mouse trying to escape. So the money's actually trying to escape from him. Okay, lovely. Right, I'm just going to leave those last couple there for you to copy down. And then I will say goodbye to my YouTube crew, my people watching the recording on YouTube. And then the Patreon crew, we're going to continue doing a bit more work. We're going to write a couple of paragraphs, one based on the worksheet that's attached. So if you are watching on Patreon, you might now want to open that download link that we've got for this lesson and have a look at that so we can get started on that. And then we're going to continue looking at the exam example we started last time with the structure and writing figurative language. So we're going to try and continue the work we were doing after our plan. Okay, right. It's enough time to copy that down. So thank you so much for those of you on YouTube. Thank you very much for subscribing. If you are subscribed, if you're not, then please do. Please like, comment as well. And please come and join us on Patreon. There's much more to do in this lesson, much more to get through. And there'll be so many more lessons now for you to look back on as well and make the most of. So come and join us on there. The link will be in the description. Thank you very much. Hope you have a lovely week.